Racist police point gun at elderly man who turns out. He's Supreme Court Justice. A police officer pointed a gun at an elderly black man's head simply because, he asked, "What law did I break?" But less than 10 minutes later, that same officer was surrounded by federal agents and came to realize the old man was one of the most powerful figures in the American South. Subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This isn't a movie. This is real. And you're about to witness every second of an encounter that shook the system. A humid night in Georgia. The clock read 11:38 p.m. Maple Hollow Road lay deserted, with only the occasional hum of insects rustling in the roadside grass. Beavis Thorne, 68 years old, Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals, was driving his 1998 Lincoln Town car home after a week presiding over cases in Atlanta. The navy blue suit he wore was slightly wrinkled after more than 10 hours of continuous work, but his eyes remained sharp, carrying the clarity of a man who upholds the law without letting power blur his compassion. On the radio, the warm, aching tones of Curtis Davis's saxophone began to play, stirring memories of his youth in New Orleans, where his father, a poor carpenter, used to stay up all night building wooden cabinets just to afford law books for his son. The car he drove wasn't just transportation. It had once belonged to his late father. To Beavis, it symbolized resilience, heritage, and a journey through layers of injustice. The engine still purred, the leather seats were as soft as the day it was bought, and the oakwood cologne that lingered inside was the same kind he'd worn since 1996. He smiled, thinking of his upcoming fishing trip with his grandson Jaden on Saturday morning. "Don't forget the orange-scented bait, Grandpa," the boy had whined playfully. It was a gentle reminder of life's small but precious moments, the kind that could be ripped away in a flash by a single pair of cold handcuffs. But then, that peaceful moment vanished. A flash of red and blue pulsed in his rearview mirror. Beavis wasn't surprised. As a black man driving through Havenwood, a staunchly white town with over 85% white residents, he knew he was always a potential target. He immediately followed the same protocol he'd taught his daughter and law students for the past 30 years. Turn on the signal, pull over, cut the engine, lower the window, place hands clearly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, palms up. The night remained still, but it was a stillness that raised goosebumps. The air felt thick with post-rain humidity and an invisible tension. The patrol car door opened. A tall figure stepped out. Officer Dwayne Miller, 15 years on the force, accused of abuse of authority at least 6 times, but always cleared due to lack of evidence. He didn't walk to the driver's window as standard procedure dictated. He circled behind the car, flashlight in hand, and shined it directly into Beavis's rearview mirror, blinding him with a sharp glare. No greeting. No, "Sir." No small talk. Just a voice as cold as steel. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Beavis blinked, calm. "I believe I was within the speed limit, officer. Is there something wrong?" In that moment, the name Beavis Thorne, the title of Chief Judge, and decades of service meant nothing, because in the eyes of the badge-wearing man before him, he was just a black man driving at night. "Your tail lights out." Officer Dwayne Miller's first words were ice cold, despite the sticky 82-degree Fahrenheit air, thick and heavy like a storm's breath. But Beavis Thorne knew for a fact the tail light had been checked just hours earlier in the basement parking lot of the federal courthouse in Atlanta. Not a crack. Not a flicker. He looked at Miller, still composed. "I'll make sure to check it first thing in the morning. Thank you for pointing it out, officer." Then, politely, he asked to open the glove compartment for his documents. But Miller cut him off, voice sharp as a blade. "Sit still. Don't move until I say so." In that moment, The space inside the car froze. Beavis kept his hands firmly on the wheel, but Miller's eyes wandered over the deep indigo Brooks Brothers suit, the polished Italian leather shoes, and the vintage Omega watch glinting on Beavis's left wrist. Then Miller narrowed his eyes. Dressed this nice, but driving this piece of junk? A seemingly offhand remark, but one that carried the weight of generational prejudice. What are you doing in Havenwood this late? Making deliveries? Janitorial work? Or, looking for an opportunity? Beavis replied, tone steady and unchanged. I'm heading home. It's 10 miles from here. The word home made Miller's lip twitch. He didn't need a map. A black man in an old car, wearing an expensive suit, claiming, I live nearby. To him, it didn't compute. This car yours? Or did you borrow it? From a client, maybe? He emphasized client, as if Beavis were some kind of shady broker or hired driver. Beavis didn't flinch. It's registered in my name, over 20 years now. My father passed it down to me. Family, huh? Miller sneered. What's in the car? Weapons? Drugs? Is that license real, or a really good fake? Each question was like a hammer to the dignity of a man who'd spent his life defending the law. But Beavis didn't react, because he understood. True power isn't in shouting, it's in maintaining control. There's nothing illegal in this vehicle, officer. He spoke neither fast nor slow, as if each syllable had been forged in the solemn courts of America. Miller scowled. He found no fear in Beavis's eyes, no confusion, no pleading, only a calm that felt unnerving, and that angered him more than open defiance. Out of the car, he barked. Beavis turned, voice still courteous but firmer now. Officer, by law, you're required to have probable cause to demand I exit my vehicle. Beyond the taillight you mentioned, do you have any additional basis? For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Miller's face, because he knew he was dealing with someone who knew the law inside out. But he also knew, on this deserted road, at 11:45 p.m., he was the only one in uniform, armed, and with the legal authority to make an arrest. You're refusing a lawful order from a law enforcement officer? Miller hissed through clenched teeth. That was the spark. A fabricated question, used as a pretext for everything terrible that would unfold next. What do you think happens now? A legal debate? A desperate phone call? Or a gun drawn? Without a single warning, Officer Dwayne Miller suddenly flung open the car door and yanked Beavis Thorne's left arm. In a violent, arrogant motion, he dragged him out of the driver's seat like hauling a sack of sand. Beavis, 68 years old, with a left knee once operated on after a staircase accident, collapsed onto the gravel-strewn pavement, his head lightly striking the car door. Before he could regain his balance, Miller had already slammed him face first onto the hood. The cold silver paint beneath Beavis's chin became the surface of humiliation. Spread your legs. Hands on the car. Now! His voice barked like it was blasting through an invisible megaphone. This was not the command of a law enforcer. It was the order of a man long accustomed to trampling others without consequence. Beavis didn't resist, not out of fear, but because he had witnessed too many shootings triggered by the slightest sudden move from a black man. At his age, he understood. Sometimes, survival itself is the highest form of resistance. Miller began patting him down aggressively. He didn't wear gloves. Each slap, each squeeze, was harsher than necessary, from ankle to armpit, from waist to shoulder. An old man in a suit at midnight, raising money for the church, or out hunting prey? The question hissed right into his ear, like venom dripping into the mind of a man used to hearing such words, but never one to stand by and take it. Beavis didn't respond, not because he didn't want to, but because any word at that moment would be twisted into resistance. Too many people, even lawyers, even professors, had lost their lives for explaining too much. Miller stepped back, pulled out his handcuffs. "I don't buy that you're as clean as you look," he muttered, and locked the cuffs with a chilling finality. The frozen steel clamped onto Beavis's wrists, blood pooling in his fingers, turning the tips purple. For a man who had signed hundreds of federal rulings, being handcuffed felt like a dagger plunged into his dignity. But Beavis remained upright, chin raised. No begging. Miller returned to the car, tearing open compartments with brute force. The glove box was yanked so hard its hinges cracked. He tossed the car registration, insurance papers, and a black and white photo of Beavis's father standing beside a handmade wooden cross onto the wet ground. A hardcover book, titled Constitutional Protections of Civil Rights, was torn at the corner, now lying beside the tire. A small notebook written in purple ink, where Bevis had recorded every citizen complaint he'd ever handled, was stomped under filthy boots. Miller popped the trunk, rifling through every storage bin. Jaden's fishing kit, carefully packed by little hands, was scattered across the gravel lot. The orange plastic lures lay crushed, like innocent dreams trampled without mercy. After more than 10 minutes tearing apart the Lincoln, he found nothing. No weapons, no drugs. Nothing but the ordered, disciplined life of a righteous man. But instead of feeling relief, Miller grew angrier. Beavis's innocence didn't satisfy him. It threatened him. Because in his mind, a black man couldn't possibly be innocent while driving at night in a white neighborhood. He stepped closer, his face twisted in the frustration of failure. Then, leaning close to Beavis's ear, he whispered like a back-alley hustler, "There's another way. If you contribute $500 to the Havenwood Police Fund, and I'll forget all this. No report. No jail. We square?" That sentence wasn't just the final insult. It was the clearest proof of a rotten system, where a man with a badge bartered justice like a street-side trinket. Beavis Thorne no longer smiled. He no longer spoke gently. In his eyes, a spark had ignited, not one of violence, but of law, reputation, and moral clarity. He had just touched something he never should have. The only street lamp on Maple Hollow flickered like it was about to die. Its pale yellow light sliced through the mist, casting a scene both surreal and suffocating, like the breath of power turned rancid. On the frigid hood of the Lincoln Town car, Beavis Thorne, 68, hands cuffed, head pressed against metal, no longer wore the patience he had once chosen as his emotional armor. For the first time in his life as a judge, he had a gun pressed to his head by a man who claimed to be the law in this town. And yet, at that very moment of mortal threat, he did not tremble. He stood tall through words, through presence, and a memory sharper than any blade. "Officer," Beavis's voice was low and forged like steel. "What you just proposed constitutes bribery of a federal official in violation of Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 201B, punishable by up to 15 years in federal prison." Miller froze for half a second. Then he roared like a beast cornered. "Who the hell do you think you are?" "I'm the law here, old man." The line, one he'd used to scare off countless civilians, now rang hollow. And then came a chilling click that shattered the night. He unlatched his holster. With ragged breath, he pulled out his Glock 22, the Havenwood Police Department standard issue, and pressed the cold muzzle against Beavis's right temple, where the pulse gently beat beneath his thin skin. The distance between life and death was now the twitch of one finger. But Beavis Thorne, a man who had listened to arguments at the Supreme Court, who had stood before hardened killers, did not bow. He inhaled deeply. His eyes were wide, unwavering. His voice rang out, slow, deliberate, precise, with the authority of a man who had ruled over hundreds of high-stakes federal cases. Dwayne Miller. Officer. Badge number 482. I strongly advise you to put down that weapon. Immediately. Miller stiffened. In a blink, his confidence shattered. He had never stated his badge number aloud. How did this old man know? The answer lay in the earlier headlights. When Miller had stepped out of his patrol car, the light had struck his chest right where the badge was pinned. And Bevis, trained through 40 years of judicial memory, had needed only one glance to remember all 6 digits. He continued, giving Miller no room to retreat into rage. Under the 6th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, I have the right to legal counsel, and I am invoking that right. Right now. Miller froze, his lips clamped shut, his eyes darted, calculating. To shoot or not? To retreat or escalate? Bevis's composure was what unraveled him. A frightened man begs, trembles, and pleads. But this old man, hands cuffed, gun to his head, voice sharp like a gavel, was not afraid of him. That was the moment Miller realized. He no longer held the power. "Call it in," he hissed through clenched teeth. No longer a threat, just panic in disguise, wrapped in a growl. He reached into Bevis's jacket, the phone he'd confiscated without reason, and threw it hard into the cuffed hands. The phone dropped onto Bevis's back. With a careful twist, he rolled it into his palm, unlocked it using Face ID on the first try, because he knew he couldn't afford a single mistake. No one expected that from this single call. The entire local police system would soon be brought to its knees by a man they thought was powerless. Amid the thick darkness of Havenwood, where the chirping of crickets drowned out the voice of conscience, Bevis Thorne's iPhone finally unlocked with Face ID, after rolling a few times across his cuffed hands. Without wasting a second, he swiped to a number with no name, only 10 digits displayed. The number he had memorized for 23 years. The 24/7 emergency hotline of the U.S. Marshals, reserved exclusively for federal judges. Before the second ring could finish, a voice answered, professional to the point of chilling. U.S. Marshal Priority Line. Please verify identity. Dwayne Miller, still leaning casually against the car door with a mocking look in his eyes, let out a short laugh. Putting on quite the show, he muttered, his face radiating contempt. In his mind, this was just a stubborn old black man trying to play courtroom to avoid trouble. But that smile froze the moment Bevis spoke. Clear, precise, like delivering a verdict in a federal courtroom. I am Chief Judge Bevis Thorne of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. I am currently being unlawfully detained and threatened with a weapon by an officer of the Havenwood Police Department. I request immediate geolocation tracking through this phone signal. Emergency code Alpha Bravo 7. Requesting top priority response. Under the fractured yellow streetlight, Miller's face shifted like a botched photo developing in a dark room. He shot upright, fists clenched. His lips moved silently, as if trying to comprehend a language from a foreign universe. Bevis Thorne. Alpha Bravo 7th, 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. He began connecting the dots. The old car, pristine like a museum piece. The tailored, outdated suit. The voice, every word sharp as nails to the skull. And that eerie calm. He lunged forward, ripped the phone from Bevis's hands and pressed it to his ear. On the other end, the dispatcher's voice continued without pause, without hesitation. Location confirmed via satellite. Rapid response team from the Atlanta office is en route to your coordinates. Estimated time of arrival, 7 minutes. Please maintain communication, Your Honor. Miller let the phone fall. Its screen glowed in the gravel. The words, connection secured, dispatch active, blinking steadily. He staggered like a man drained of blood. The same hands that had gripped Bevis's throat now trembled uncontrollably. He turned to look at the old man he had humiliated for over 30 minutes. But this time, he didn't see a black geezer. He saw the razor-sharp stare of a federal judge, a man who could dismantle his career and possibly the entire police department with a single hearing. Who are you?" Miller stammered. His voice no longer carried the weight of power, but the pitiful tone of a child caught stealing. Beavis stared at him, unblinking. "I am Chief Judge Beavis Thorne of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, responsible for the jurisdictions of Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. And you, Officer Dwayne Miller, badge 482, have just committed multiple federal offenses: abuse of power, armed intimidation, and attempted bribery of a government official." To Beavis, those were simply facts. But to Miller, they were the blade that severed forever the illusion that he would never be held accountable. In just a few minutes, the sound of federal sirens would echo through the streets. Agents Miller never thought he'd see in person. FBI, U.S. Marshals, internal security forces would appear before him like a nightmare scripted by the Constitution. This was no longer a scolding between a cop and an uppity old man. This was a clash between a man who lived for justice and one who thought he stood above the law. Dwayne Miller, the notorious officer of Havenwood, the one who once proudly said, "I'm the law here," now stood in the middle of the road like a child caught with stolen candy. His hands trembled so violently that he couldn't hold his keys. He fumbled through his pocket, dropped the keys twice on the gravel before finally unlocking the patrol car to remove the cuffs from Beavis Thorne. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Please." Each word cracked between shallow, panicked breaths. Beavis said nothing. He didn't need to. The red marks on his wrists, left by metal pressed too tightly for nearly half an hour, were the clearest accusation. Undeniably proof for any federal prosecutor. Suddenly, the eastern sky lit up with flashing lights, not from street lamps, nor a typical patrol car. These came from 3 black SUVs with special federal license plates. Exactly 1 minute and 47 seconds after the Alpha Bravo 7 distress call, the vehicles appeared like phantoms, rumbling across the red dirt road. They didn't use traditional sirens, but high-frequency tactical tones, sharp as razors, slicing through the night air, vibrating the atmosphere. The SUVs braked hard. Gravel scattered. Headlights blazed straight into Miller's patrol car, so bright he had to shield his face. Doors swung open. From each SUV, 2 agents leapt out. 6 in total. Black uniforms, body armor, tactical boots. Across their backs in bold yellow letters, FBI and USMARSHALS. Each held an AR-15, the standard assault rifle for rapid response teams. No one spoke, except for one agent issuing commands. "Federal law enforcement." "Hands on your head. Drop your weapon. Get on your knees now." Dwayne Miller was no longer the one giving orders. He stood frozen under the blinding beams. His lips pale, he stepped back, then slowly raised his hands above his head, like the suspects he had once sneered at. From the first SUV, a man emerged. Charcoal gray suit, white shirt, black tie. His face as sharp as a blade, his eyes unblinking, like they'd never missed a line on a warrant. Agent Hubert Chen, chief investigator of civil rights violations at the FBI Atlanta, the man behind high-profile cases, like Brunswick III and Savannah Shield. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. He simply walked up beside Beavis, a silent but unmistakable signal to the entire team. This man is very senior, very important. "Judge Thorne, are you all right?" Chen's voice rang out just loud enough for all to hear, firm with respect and urgency. Beavis gave a slight nod, adjusting the wrinkles in his suit jacket, still creased from the violent scuffle. He did not bow, did not reveal anger. His cold stare never left the man who had pressed a gun to his head. "I'm fine. Thank you for arriving in time, Agent Chen." Chen turned and signaled to 2 agents to approach Miller. They disarmed his Glock, removed his radio, and stripped every tool from his belt. Each move practiced 1,000 times, flawlessly executed. One of them recited the Miranda rights clearly. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The tone was steady, merciless, like a condemnation spoken by the very system Miller once served. Beavis stood still, watching everything unfold, not like a victim seeking revenge, but like a judge who understood. Justice does not need to shout. It only needs to arrive on time. Less than 10 minutes ago, he was the one shoved against a car window with a gun to his head. Now, that same man who swaggered with false authority was cuffed, spotlighted, and read his rights like a common federal criminal. And this was only the beginning. The moment the words were spoken, the 2 U.S. Marshal agents didn't hesitate. In a series of fluid, precise movements like a SWAT drill, they stripped Dwayne Miller of his Glock 22, radio, taser baton, and even the dagger strapped behind his back. He stood still, not daring to react. His breath was ragged, chest heaving beneath a now useless bulletproof vest. A 3rd agent stepped forward and began reading the Miranda rights in a calm voice, tinged with a chilling sarcasm. The same tone Miller had used for years against countless innocent people of color. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Then came the handcuffs, but not standard issue. These were federal-grade stainless steel cuffs, weighing nearly 3 pounds, typically used only for high-risk or combative suspects. This time, his badge couldn't save the very hands that once shoved others to the ground. The agents escorted him forward, stopping directly beneath the blinding headlights of the 3 federal SUVs, in full view. The same place where every humiliation he'd ever inflicted was now returning to expose him. Meanwhile, Agent Hubert Chen didn't say a word more than necessary. He simply tilted his head. Immediately, the special forensics team moved into action. One man scanned the scene with a digital sensor. Another examined the faint smear of blood on the car hood, where Beavis's face had been pinned. A third opened the hard drive case to retrieve all audio and visual data from the patrol car's dash cam, including the part Miller had accidentally shut off. Every movement was cold, precise, deliberate. This wasn't just about arresting a man. It was an autopsy of a rotten system. 5 minutes later, another local patrol car sped up. It braked hard, scattering gravel. The door burst open. Frank Bailey, Havenwood's police chief, 61 years old, stocky, salt and pepper beard, wearing khaki shorts and an Adidas track jacket, stepped out, still holding an untouched coffee cup. When he saw the scene before him, the cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the ground. Gun confiscated. Miller cuffed. FBI present. And at the center of it all was Beavis Thorne, a man he had once seen on TV during a Senate hearing. "What the hell is going on here?" Bailey shouted, his voice panicked, angry, and disbelieving all at once. Hubert Chen stepped forward calmly and presented his badge. "Agent Hubert Chen, FBI, your officer, Dwayne Miller, has been arrested on federal charges, including violation of civil rights under color of law, armed intimidation, and attempted bribery of a government official." Bailey's face flushed red. "Federal? You've got to be kidding me. This is all a big misunderstanding." Chen didn't smile, didn't mock. He simply said coldly, "No, Chief Bailey." The person threatened tonight was not a civilian. It was Chief Judge Beavis Thorne, United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit. Bailey's face went paper white. He turned to look at Miller, the man he had praised at town hall meetings as a dedicated officer. The man he'd once patted on the back and said, "You do things your way. I trust you." Now that man looked like a crumpled shadow, wrapped in steel cuffs, head bowed, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Chen wasn't finished. His voice remained even, but it sliced like a blade. And starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow, under orders from the Department of Justice, the Havenwood Police Department will undergo a full-scale investigation. That includes all traffic stops, warrantless arrests, and internal complaints from the past 36 months. Bailey gasped. In a single night, the tiny empire he had built on silence, protection, and power began to crumble. As for Beavis, he stood silently. No shouting, no accusations, because he knew the silence of the law, when it finally speaks, can sweep away everything. As Dwayne Miller was shoved into the back compartment of the black federal SUV, the metallic clunk of the armored door closing echoed through the air. He turned his head for one last look. But what he saw wasn't the flashing lights or the agents circling him. It was the image of Beavis Thorne, the man he once thought was just some old black man easy to push around, now standing tall beneath a field of light, an unyielding symbol. Beavis's face showed no rage, no gloating. It was calm, like the surface of a deep lake. But every wrinkle on his forehead, every red mark from the cuffs etched into his skin, branded a silent verdict onto Miller's soul without a single word. Agent Hubert Chen turned and stepped beside him. "Judge Thorne, is there anything you'd like to say before we clear the scene?" Beavis looked toward the SUV, where Miller was detained. A soft exhale. Then he said just one sentence, short, clear, and final, like a verdict handed down from the bench. "Make sure that everyone, including him, is handled by the full, due process of law." It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't revenge. It was the return of power to the very system Miller had trampled. The law. Hubert Chen nodded, his eyes glancing at the red marks still visible on Beavis's wrists. "We give you our word, Your Honor. Every step will follow the Constitution to the letter." No further words were needed. No press conference. No tears. The three SUVs simultaneously turned around. Their tires crunched across the gravel road like they were grinding down every ounce of arrogance Miller had carried for over a decade. As the convoy left Havenwood, it left behind an enormous silence. Gunshots, no shouting, but filled with the weight of justice restored. Police Chief Frank Bailey stood frozen. His eyes moved slowly, following the receding taillights. He didn't speak. His entire posture sagged under the gravity of the moment. Perhaps for the first time in his 26-year career, he felt small at the presence of a man he had completely misjudged. As for Beavis Thorne, he didn't rush home. He bent down and began picking up every item scattered on the ground. The photo of his father, old, but still neatly folded. A plastic orange fishing lure, one hook broken. A pencil-drawn card from his grandson, Jaden, scrawled with the words, "Hope you catch a big one, Grandpa." Then he retrieved the book, The Constitution and the Citizen, tossed into a puddle. The cover was soiled, but the pages remained intact. He flipped to the last page, where a handwritten note in pale blue ink from over 50 years ago still read, "The law is a shield, but sometimes you must know how to wield it as a sword." Signed, Solomon Thorne, Beavis's grandfather, once a courthouse janitor who had always believed his grandson would become a judge. Beavis closed the book without wiping the cover. That stain, he knew, would serve as a reminder that even the Constitution can be tarnished. But it endures, so long as the hand holding it doesn't tremble. Before leaving, he sat behind the wheel. His right hand turned the key. The 1998 Lincoln Town car engine purred gently, like a breath finally soothed. And then, the rear lights flickered on. Not flashing, not broken, not burned out. Glowing, steady, like a truth that had never changed. The reason for the arrest? Just a pretext. The reason he survived? Because he knew when to stay silent and when to speak. 2 weeks after that night, the federal transport van stopped in front of the Northern District Federal Courthouse of Georgia, where Dwayne Miller, former Havenwood police officer, stepped out in handcuffs, head lowered, and not a trace of arrogance left in his stride. The indictment against him wasn't just long, it was sharp, like a series of arrows aimed at the chest of anyone who ever believed themselves untouchable. Deprivation of rights under color of law, 18 U.S. Code, Paragraph 242. Extortion of a federal official, armed threat against a federal judge, obstruction of justice. In total, if convicted on all counts, he faced up to 30 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole. At the trial, Beavis Thorne appeared not as a chief judge, but as the lead witness, the survivor of a roadside weapon threat and racial humiliation. He sat upright, speaking every word and detail with clarity, a living indictment in flesh and blood that left the entire courtroom frozen in stunned silence. Footage from the dash cam, though shut off abruptly when Miller noticed it, still captured the first 22 minutes. Miller is standing behind the car, flashlight shining into the side mirror to cause discomfort, his voice laced with malice. Wearing a suit, but driving this old car. What are you, a fake pastor? And the act of forcing Beavis onto the hood, cuffing him, rummaging through the trunk without cause, along with the blatant offer, $500 for the police fund, and I forget this ever happened. Miller's defense attorney tried to spin the usual narrative. Remorse, job burnout, unconscious reaction. But in front of a jury of 12, including one black military veteran and one former law student, the defense sounded like salt on the wounds of justice. Deliberation took less than 4 hours. The verdict was read before a crowd of reporters. Defendant Dwayne Miller is guilty on all charges, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, no parole eligibility, no transfer to state facility. Miller collapsed onto the defense table as if finally understanding. His downfall came not only from the law, but from his arrogance now exposed under the true light of justice. The court stripped him of his badge, revoked all weapon privileges, and, most notably, permanently erased his government employee record from all state databases. His $62,000 a year pension, gone, as if it never existed. The reputation built on the silence of fellow officers. Now, a permanent scar on every search engine database, and the consequences didn't stop there. Police Chief Frank Bailey, once celebrated for keeping Havenwood orderly, was forced to file for early retirement after a Justice Department internal review revealed he had deliberately concealed 17 complaints related to Miller's abuses over the past 8 years. The Havenwood Police Department was placed under special federal oversight for 5 years. Every arrest, vehicle stop, and use of force incident must now be reported quarterly to the Department of Justice. Additionally, an independent oversight board, including representatives from the African American community, veterans, and journalists, was established, something unprecedented in the town's history. From a single unauthorized traffic stop at 11 p.m., an entire system had been laid bare. No more room for, "I didn't know," "I was just following protocol," or "he was a good cop." Justice never comes quickly, but when it does, it arrives with full weight, precise truth, and the memory of generations who were once silenced. Beavis Thorne didn't hold a press conference, didn't appear on television, didn't write a memoir, or give an exclusive interview. After the night a gun was pressed to his head by a cop who never learned the difference between power and justice, he simply stayed silent. But it wasn't the silence of the powerless. It was the silence of a man who knows the law doesn't need to scream, it only needs to be enforced properly. 3 months after Dwayne Miller's arrest, Beavis Thorne appeared at Emory Law School in Atlanta. In an auditorium filled with more than 300 final-year students, he stood at the lectern, without stating his title. He simply told a story. "A friend of mine," he began, "was pulled over at 11 p.m. His taillight was said to be out, but it wasn't. That friend was handcuffed, pinned to the hood, interrogated like a criminal, and finally had a gun pressed to his temple." A student raised a hand. "Did he do anything wrong, sir?" Beavis smiled. "Only drove with skin a few shades too dark." Whispers rippled through the room, and then he ended with a question that made the entire class fall silent. "If a federal judge can be treated that way, how do you think a regular citizen will be treated?" No names were mentioned, but every legal scholar, federal officer, and graduate that followed knew that friend was him, Beavis Thorne. From that moment, the phrase "the Thorne file" was added to the mandatory training curriculum of the FBI, the Department of Justice, and state police academies. It became a vivid case study in abuse of power, the strength of composure, and the line between law enforcement and human dignity. In a closed-door meeting in D.C., Hubert Chen, the agent who responded that night, spoke before the Internal Oversight Council. "If we'd arrived 5 minutes later, we'd be placing a star on a coffin, and this country would have lost a quiet symbol of justice." As for Beavis, he never sought titles. He still drove the old Lincoln Town car every week to visit his father's grave. The taillight still worked. The interior was still orderly. But to him, the car was no longer just a vehicle. It was a living symbol of how fragile justice becomes in the hands of the unethical. The book, The Constitution and the Citizen, once thrown to the ground by Miller, was later repaired and republished, with a foreword written by Beavis. "The law is not a gun, it is a shield, and sometimes a mirror, to show who truly deserves to wield power." The Havenwood Police Department, once a source of fear for people of color, has now entered its second year under federal supervision. They have hired 47% more officers from minority communities, reduced unjustified traffic stops by 62% in 12 months, and established a hotline allowing citizens to report directly to the Department of Justice. To Beavis, those numbers weren't a victory. They were only signs that justice can be restored if we refuse to stay silent. And in his final address at a judicial conference in Montgomery, Alabama, he said just one sentence, enough to bring the entire hall to its feet in a 3-minute standing ovation. "I'm not the law, but I am the one the law is meant to protect, and I will make sure, as long as I draw breath, that you are too."